military action just achieved kinetic regime change in the Western Hemisphere. We saw the arrest, the rapid removal of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. And yet, oil prices? They instantly dropped.
Right. Counterintuitive.
Completely. And at the same time, gold spikes. It goes vertical, breaking the $4,500 mark per ounce.
And analysts are now saying it could hit $5,000 this year.
This divergence, this paradox in the market, it's not random noise. It is the financial signature of a fundamental a tectonic restructuring of global power.
This is Neural Pulse. Let's analyze.
The events of just these first few days of January 2026, they're already being seen as the definitive end of the post-Cold War order.
It closes the book on that, 30-year chapter of generalized global policing?
And we are now entering an era ruled by what the intelligence community is already calling the Trump Corollary. It's an aggressive, very modern reinterpretation of the Monroe Doctrine. It's the logic of force, plain and simple.
And that is the core takeaway. Our mission today is to really unpack these interconnected threads. We're going to look at the kinetic war in the Americas, the hybrid war in Europe, the invisible cyber war in Asia.
And how all of this creates these profound, often paradoxical financial realities. For you, the listener, the key is understanding why these changes are structural. They're permanent. This isn't just temporary turbulence.
Okay, let's start with that kinetic shockwave, Operation Caracas.
The facts from January 3rd are just stunning in their speed. I mean, this was swift, unilateral regime change.
And it was done under the guise of law enforcement, right? They used that 2020 U.S. drug terror indictment against Maduro.
That's the pretext.
The surgical nature of the operation is absolutely central to understanding the signal being sent. Reports indicate over 150 aircraft.
150.
Not just for transport. They were there to immediately neutralize Venezuelan air defenses. You had special operations forces storming Miraflores Palace, arresting Maduro and his wife.
Celia Flores?
And then rapidly transferring them out of the country, all within hours.
And while U.S. officials framed this as law enforcement, the violence on the ground, it tells a different story.
Yeah, the on-the-ground reports are talking about at least 80 casualties. Civilians, security forces.
And then you have President Trump's public statements. He said the U.S. would run Venezuela. He warned the interim leader she'd pay a bigger price than Maduro if she stepped out of line. This wasn't just a removal. This was a seizure of state function.
And that action sets the precedent. It's the new strategic framework, this Trump corollary.
So it's an explicit, kinetic declaration. The U.S. is saying it intends to physically exclude external powers, right. China, Russia, Iran, keep them out of the Western Hemisphere. It's a definitive shift to exclusive spheres of influence.
Okay, but hold on. If the pretext is law enforcement, but the intent is pure state seizure, how do rivals like Russia not push back harder?
That's the pivotal question, isn't it?
We saw China call it a serious violation of international law. Russia delivered a very loud but ultimately hollow condemnation.
Right. But compare that to 2019. Back then, Russia was flying in special forces, advisors. They were propping Maduro up. This time, nothing.
That lack of meaningful kinetic retaliation, it suggests something monumental has happened behind the scenes.
And you're pointing to the grand bargain hypothesis.
I am. It's gaining traction fast among European strategists. The idea is that a trade-off is underway. Russia tacitly accepts U.S. freedom of action in Venezuela.
Their backyard.
In exchange for U.S. tacit acceptance of Russia's security interests in the former Soviet sphere.
So Ukraine.
Most critically, Ukraine. So the silence from the Kremlin isn't weakness.
It's the strategic pivot itself.
Precisely. It's a return to 19th century power politics, great powers recognizing each other's backyards, and the consequences for Europe are immediate and profound.
Because if the U.S. is focused on its own sphere, Europe now has to autonomously provide for its own defense.
Which brings us to the Paris summit on January 6th. You had this coalition of the willing, 27 nations, convening to hammer out new security protocols.
And the U.S. was there. Special Envoy Witkoff and Jared Kushner.
Yes, but listen to their language. They endorsed the protocols, but their rhetoric was all about financial aid, peacekeeping, economic prosperity.
They're minimizing the military commitment.
They're shifting the military burden. The risk of European security is now squarely on European shoulders.
And the most concrete thing to come out of that was from the UK and France, both nuclear powers.
They signed a declaration to establish what they're calling military hubs inside Ukraine, but only after a ceasefire.
So these aren't huge bases. They're designed to protect critical long-term weapons, high-value equipment that Europe plans to keep sending.
The labeling is the key here. They call it a force of reassurance.
Right. So it's specifically designed to provide a security presence without activating NATO's Article 5.
Because Article 5 would require U.S. involvement, which the U.S. is signaling it wants to avoid. It's a creative solution, but it creates a permanent tripwire, a small European-backed presence inside a potential Russian sphere of interest. That raises the long-term risk.
And that fear of being left alone is fueling this intense physical fortification across Eastern Europe, Fortress Baltica.
A clear shift to a deterrence by denial strategy. They're not just planning to delay an invasion anymore, they're trying to make occupation prohibitively expensive.
And you can see this in the physical infrastructure they're building right now.
Absolutely. Latvia has finished its armed border fence. It's not just wire, it's integrated with sensors, autonomous drone swarms.
Estonia is launching a massive bunker construction program along its borders, building strong points to treat heavy armor.
And Lithuania. I mean, they're preparing to install explosives on key bridges near Kaliningrad and Belarus. For rapid demolition. That is hard deterrence built into the landscape itself.
And this shift to overt physical defense, it's not just on land. The hybrid escalation is becoming openly destructive.
Especially in the maritime domain. You have to look at the Gulf of Finland. The use of civilian infrastructure for state sabotage is accelerating.
We're talking about the Fitberg incident.
The fascinating part is the combination of intent and plausible deniability. Authorities seized this civilian cargo ship, the Fitberg, after confirming it had intentionally dragged its anchor for dozens of kilometers.
Along a specific mapped route.
And the result? Severed submarine telecom and power cables between Helsinki and Tallinn. It's a physical attack on energy security and communications.
And it mirrors the new Polar Bear incident from 2023. You use a civilian vessel with a mixed crew.
Reports mention Russians, Georgians, Kazakhs on the Fitberg.
Right. It gives the state sponsor layers of deniability. It exposes this deep vulnerability in Europe's infrastructure that you can't solve with a warship.
And that vulnerability, the reliance on infrastructure that can be attacked physically or digitally, that leads us directly from Europe to the invisible confrontation in the Indo-Pacific.
Because the core threat here isn't just traditional espionage anymore.
Not at all. We are now seeing war preparation led by the Chinese state-sponsored group Volt Typhoon.
And their objective is very focused. It is not about sealing secrets. It is explicitly to pre-position for physical disruption during a potential conflict over Taiwan.
This is a completely different kind of cyber warfare. Their method is all about invisibility, long-term persistence. They use living off the land tactics, Lot LL.
Okay, let's slow down and explain Lot LL because this is crucial for you to understand. They avoid traditional malware.
Right. No malicious code that security systems are designed to flag. Instead, they use existing legitimate network tools, things like PowerShell, that are already installed on a victim's computer.
So it's not breaking down the front door.
It's like using the housekeeper's own keys to move from room to room. Because they're using authorized tools just in unusual ways, they blend in.
And that lets them stay undetected for how long?
5 years?
Maybe longer.
They achieve complete digital stealth inside critical U.S. infrastructure. Power grids, transport, water systems.
And the initial intrusion, it often comes from targeting something simple, like a small office or home office router.
Exactly. They use those consumer-grade devices as springboards to build what they call the KV botnet and then move deeper into high-value targets.
The strategic implication here is that the cyber war, it's already open.
In a very real sense, Volt Typhoon's ultimate goal is to generate domestic panic, paralyze U.S. deployment assets, ports, airports during a Taiwan crisis. They want to slow down the American intervention. The switch is already wired into the U.S. homeland. It's just a political decision when to flip it.
And while that invisible war is happening, the kinetic confrontation in the South China Sea just keeps escalating.
Yes, the second Thomas Shoal, or Ayungin Shoal, is approaching what looks like a permanent near-war status for the Philippines.
The change in China's posture is what's significant. It's shifted from, sporadic harassment with water cannons to a permanent deterrence posture.
We're seeing China Coast Guard vessels, CCG 5304 and 23514, supported by 9 maritime militia ships, imposing a constant blockade against Philippine resupply efforts.
And the risk of an accident, of a military conflict, is just spiking, especially as the Philippines considers coordinating with allies like the U.S. Japan, Australia.
And China has signaled that any joint allied effort will be treated as external force intervention, which raises the specter of a direct clash.
So these huge structural shifts, regime change, new spheres of influence, open cyber war, they bring us right back to the markets.
Right back to that opening hook.
So let's circle back the oil versus gold paradox. Why did oil drop after Maduro's capture, after an act of kinetic violence?
The market's interpretation is clear. They are pricing in the rapid return of U.S. oil majors. ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips.
They assume U.S. control means a swift recovery of Venezuelan production.
Exactly. Venezuela has some of the largest reserves in the world. The market believes U.S. interests will efficiently take control, stabilize things, and increase long-term global supply. That's the downward pressure on crude.
And then gold. It spikes to that unprecedented $4,500 mark. A massive flight to quality. Why at that exact moment?
That rally is driven by deep structural mistrust in fiat currencies and, frankly, in the security of the U.S. dollar itself. The unilateral nature of the Maduro action reinforces this global perception of the weaponization of the dollar.
So countries are now afraid their dollar reserves could be frozen or seized for political reasons?
Precisely. The use of force in Venezuela immediately strengthens the argument for de-dollarization.
Central banks in the global south and key rivals are accelerating a shift they've been on for years, out of the dollar and into physical, non-seizable assets, like gold.
That $4,500 spike reflects a collapse of neutral trust in the system's rules. When the world sees rules can be changed overnight by force, they seek the most fundamental security there is.
And even with that theoretical stabilization in oil, the actual cost of moving goods remains sky high.
Absolutely. Logistics costs are the clearest leading indicator. A container from Asia to the U.S. is baseline, $2,200 to $3,200 for a 40-foot box?
And that's already inflated by the Red Sea disruption.
But here is the critical warning in the data. If demand spikes, or if the Red Sea gets even slightly worse, that cost could skyrocket to over $9,500 per box.
And to put that number in perspective for you, the listener, that's not a surcharge. That means every single consumer good on that ship just had its delivery cost jump by 300% or more. That is structural inflation hitting you 3 to 5 months from now.
And this combination of kinetic action and financial fear forces even close U.S. allies to walk a very difficult tightrope.
You look at Japan. Prime Minister Takaichi's statements were so careful. She emphasized safety, democratic restoration, but she never explicitly endorsed the U.S. military action.
That evasion is strategic. Japan's core concern is that the U.S. action in Venezuela gives China a pertinent pretext.
A precedent.
A precedent has been set for unilateral action based on domestic legal grounds. China could use that same logic to justify a quarantine or an inspection simulation around Taiwan,
dragging Japan into a conflict it wants no part of.
So if you synthesize this whole new framework, the transition is complete. The post-Cold War era, it's over.
The international system has moved from an era of generalized uncertainty where risks were diffuse to an era dominated by certain threats and the unambiguous logic of force.
Existing frameworks are failing. They can't constrain great power competition, and this forces nation-states, investors, corporations. It forces everyone to build strategies based on autonomous survival.
You have to assume that your greatest security risks are now your most certain ones, and you have to plan accordingly.
Neural Pulse. Clarity in a complex world. See you tomorrow.